I've been taking a look at Teal Swan lately. For those who don't know, Teal Swan is the leader of a cult called Teal Tribe. She released a video fairly recently defending herself against the accusation that she's a cult leader. It was a pretty long video, so I split up my debunk into multiple parts. You don't have to watch them in any specific order. They all stand independently of each other. In a recent video, I took a look at and debunked her claim that she doesn't exploit people financially. This time we're going to be taking a look at free will and influence. So let's give this a look and see what she has to say for herself. Let's get into it. As I mentioned, she's in full defense mode. She's claiming she isn't a cult leader. And to prove it, she goes through a cult checklist and explains why each point doesn't apply to her. The checklist she's using is by the International Cultic Studies Association, or ICSA. It's a perfectly valid list to use, but I choose to use the BITE model instead in my videos because the ICSA list is geared more toward religious cults, where the BITE model can help identify political cults, cults of personality, that kind of thing. She hit on some other points in the model earlier in the video, which I covered in other parts of this debunk, so give those a watch if you haven't already seen them. But in this video, we're starting out on the point, members are expected to devote inordinate amounts of time to the group and group-related activities. Let's take a look at the first clip.
Members are expected to devote inordinate amounts of time to the group and group-related activities. No one is required to do anything in this group, and I think you would find with the majority of people who follow my material that requiring them to do something would meet with incredible resistance.
Oh please, not the laugh again. I covered this in part 2. It's creepy, knock it off, please. Now about this point, members are expected to devote inordinate amounts of time to the group and group-related activities. She says nobody's expected to do anything they don't want to do, and requiring her followers to do something will be met with incredible resistance. She probably doesn't realize just how damning that statement was. She's pointing out how unified her group is on certain specific points. The reason unity like that is significant is because cults use behavior modification with a system of rewards and punishments to form out a cult identity, which replaces what's called their authentic identity. So does she do this? Well, she did just admit that her group's personalities are unified in one key way. So how does she do it? It's something I haven't touched on in great detail. It's something called shadow work. Every time I talk about Teal Swan, I get some jagoff in the comments saying, well yeah, but shadow work is legit though. No, it's not actually. Let me tell you where the term comes from. Back when Sigmund Freud was working on whatever mother-related stuff he was working on, he had something of a colleague in the field named Carl Jung. Carl and Freud are known as the fathers of psychology. They did great work in the field and legitimized it as a science. But pretty much everything they came up with has been debunked at this point. Not everything exactly, but a lot of stuff. For example, the id, ego, and superego, terms coined by Freud, are amorphous, abstract terms that are basically meaningless. What are they? It's something you can hypothesize, but it isn't really something you can build upon, or even falsify. Psychology went on to focus more on cognition and behaviorism. Carl Jung's shadow is basically the equivalent of Freud's id. Abstract, amorphous concepts that are basically worthless to the science of psychology. We learned about it when I was in college. We also talked about some of Carl Jung's other beliefs, which heavily informed his worldview. He believed in alchemy. Most of his writings from the 1940s were about it. His spiritual beliefs were actually very similar to what Teal Swan is pushing, which is probably why she cites him so much. He had some really strange views about humans transcending to a new plane of existence by gaining 2 new chromosomes and all kinds of weird, unscientific stuff. In fact, the band Tool wrote a whole song about it called 46 and 2. But he did make some respectable contributions to psychology by legitimizing it as a real science, even though we now know that most of the stuff he said was complete bullshit. Just like Freud putting forward the idea that people who smoke cigarettes are obsessed with phallic objects and are in love with their mothers, or whatever other nonsense he came up with. It's not grounded in fact. Just because he had some legitimate contributions doesn't mean literally every single thing he said was legitimate, or even that the things he said back then are valuable today. So when I see people in my comments saying that Carl Jung came up with the shadow, and thus something called shadow work must be legitimate, I can't help but laugh at the absurdity of it. Now, I really looked into this. I was curious. I didn't write this off instantly, even though the concept of the shadow is only really valuable today for its historical significance, for the most part. In psychology, the shadow is the darker part of a person's psyche. It's their id, their base animal instincts that drives them to take what they want at any cost. And Teal Swan pushes her members to do what she calls shadow work, basically trying to get you in touch with your deepest desires and take them at any cost. cost. This is why her followers tend to be so toxic. They believe in brutal honesty. If they fucking hate you, then they'll tell you they do. It's woo psychology, not based on fact or science. It hasn't been accepted by the wider psychology community. I couldn't find a word about it in scholarly papers. I couldn't find any mention of it anywhere except on New Age woo websites, like Teal Swan's website, for example. Now, it's possible it just hasn't been examined by psychologists, and that's why nobody's had anything to say about it. If that's the case, then I'll revise my viewpoint when it's finally discussed in real science circles. But this smacks of L. Ron Hubbard's Dianetics book. He submitted it to psychology journals, and they laughed him off the face of the earth. They rejected it. It was woo nonsense. Until the scientific community accepts it, I'm not going to accept it. Let's move on to the next clip.
The most loyal members, the true believers, feel there can be no life outside the context of the group. They believe there is no other way to be, and often fear reprisals to themselves or others if they leave, or even consider leaving the group. I don't, nor should I, have control over how people are going to feel or react to somebody deciding that they're going to no longer follow my material or no longer be a part of Teal Tribe. That being said, there is absolutely no reprisal, no consequence, and no punishment for deciding to leave Teal Tribe. I personally would simply hope that if they did that, they would do it in a way that wasn't a push away, shall we say, to the rest of the people who decide to be in alignment with what the group is doing, to be in alignment with the material that I teach. Also, Teal Tribe is open to people returning. There have been quite a few people who have decided that it's just almost too much for them.
Take another listen to this part right here.
I personally would simply hope that if they did that, they would do it in a way that wasn't a push away, shall we say, to the rest of the people who decide to be in alignment with what the group is doing.
She's blaming the people who leave for pushing away. I released a video recently where I was talking about my mom shunning me, and she did the exact same thing. She blamed me for ending the relationship. It's my fault we can't talk because I decided to not be a part of the group anymore. Now, I don't really care if Teal Swan doesn't tell people to shun non-believers. That's completely irrelevant. In cult situations, what matters is the end result. Is that what members are doing? Yes, in this case, Teal Tribe members tend to do that. Not always, but more often than not. Notice what she said here.
There have been quite a few people who have decided that it's just almost too much for them.
Too much for them? Why would it be too much for them? Is it because there are lots of expectations and dramatic life changes? I've been a member of plenty of groups before. I was a member of an atheist group for a while. I was a member of a chill, moderate church. I was a member of a club in high school. At no point in my life did I ever feel like being a member of a group was quote-unquote too much for me, and as a result left the group and lost contact with anybody who remained a part of the group, unless the group was a cult. That did happen to me when I left Jehovah's Witnesses. Let's listen to the next clip.
If people are worried about someone else being led astray or joining a cult, the real issue is that they do not trust that person with themselves, and they believe that free will can be taken away. If self-trust and belief in one's own free will did exist, one would trust themselves to keep on the path of what is right for themselves and the world, regardless of other people going astray. The real conversation to be had, which is being highlighted by the topic of cults, is about free will and influence. Therefore, ask yourself, why don't I trust myself? Why am I afraid that I can be influenced into losing my free will? Let this be the real conversation between yourself and those who you think have joined a cult.
This is the part I felt I needed to get to. So what she's arguing here is that if somebody is worried about you joining a cult, then they don't respect you. In reality, it's the cult leaders I don't respect. I can sit here and look at statistics. People who are in an emotionally vulnerable state are more easily manipulated by cult leaders like Teal Swan, or like Jehovah's Witnesses, or Mormons, or Scientologists. I'm doing this video because I watch new people join these groups every single day. These groups are objectively harmful. It is a bad thing when a group tries to alter your personality through behavior modification. It's a bad thing when they influence you to use their doctrine as a moral compass rather than your own conscience. It's a bad thing when the group treats ex-members differently. It's a bad thing when love and acceptance is reliant on your membership in the group. And I'm watching their numbers go up every single day. This is like a sleazy lawyer's argument to keep people from asking too many questions. If somebody is warning you of danger, then it means they don't respect you. Free will is a religious concept anyways, not a scientific one. People are susceptible to influence. That's just how it is. Even I am. I have to be vigilant and aware of when influence is destructive or constructive. Take a look at this chart, the influence continuum. People influencing you in a healthy way will encourage you to be your authentic self. And I don't mean this twisted version of authentic that Teal Swan is pushing, this shadow work bullshit. I mean true authenticity, as in not trying to change your personality, accepting you for who you are. They won't condition their love or friendship on group membership. They'll encourage creativity and humor rather than solemnity, fear, and guilt. They'll encourage critical thinking rather than dependence and obedience. The leadership should be accountable, trustworthy, and empower people rather than claiming absolute authority, as we've seen Teal Swan do in previous videos, secretive or deceptive, elitist or grandiose, or narcissistic. If this stuff applies to the leadership, and it seems pretty obvious it does in Teal Swan's case, then they're using destructive influence.
Let this be the real conversation between yourself and those who you think have joined a cult. Why don't you trust them with themselves? Why do you think they can be influenced into losing their free will? The answer to these questions that you will be asking yourself is a good measure of what you actually think of a person. At the end of the day, it's insulting.
That's really clever language designed to lock people even deeper into cults.
And when it comes to influence, the most important thing is the intention behind a person's drive to influence other people.
Nope, intention is irrelevant. I have no way of knowing what her intentions are. I have no way of knowing the intentions of the governing body of Jehovah's Witnesses. To be charitable, I'll assume that they're all well-intentioned. The end result is the important part. They're destructive to the people around them. That's all I care about. But she's about to give us an example, so let's give it a listen.
For example, a politician might have the intention to influence people towards a policy because they have personal financial interests that would benefit by the adoption of that policy. On the other hand, they might have the intention of influencing people towards that policy because they believe strongly that it is in the best interests of people.
When you have direct evidence of their intentions, intentions matter. But for the sake of being charitable, I'm not assuming anybody's intentions here. But does intention really matter in that case anyways? What's the goal? The goal is to improve society, make it better. I don't like the fact that politicians take money. It bothers the living hell out of me. I can't stand it. And if I have two politicians who hold the exact same policy positions, but one is taking big donations from giant corporations and the other isn't, I'm voting for the one who isn't taking money from corporations. But my goal is to improve society. Intentions only matter because the person in power is unpredictable if they have bad intentions. You don't know whose pockets they'll be in next. The end result is what matters. Are they going to make society better? The policy changes big corporations want to make aren't in the best interests of society. They're in the best interests of the corporations. Sometimes that stuff is in alignment, sometimes it isn't.
I have the intention of influencing people towards their own authenticity, towards their own personal truth, their own personal desires, towards awareness, towards them making better decisions for their relationships and for their lives in general, so that the lives that we are all living on this planet can be even better than they are in the first place.
Oh, I see. She's still stuck on the I'm well-intentioned so I can do anything I want bit. I'm sorry, that's just absurd. And almost everybody listening right now knows it. I can't believe she even bothered to put that idea forward. That's embarrassing. Anyways, that's all I've got for you. If you like what I do and you want to make sure I can continue to do it, you can support me in a few ways. First, you can support me on Patreon. That's probably the best way. But if you want to get something back for your support, you can check out my Teespring. I sell all kinds of shirts and stickers and stuff on there. Second, you can support me by checking out my Etsy store. I sell 3D printed stands for every system from the original Nintendo to the Xbox One. And finally, if you want to support me in other ways, you can check me out on my other channels. I have the podcast channel, which is where I talk about whatever's on my mind. Politics, social issues, whatever. You can also find it everywhere podcasts can be found. Or you can check out the videos on my main channel where I focus on destructive cults. As it is with most channels these days, I rely on the support of viewers like you to keep my channel alive, so sharing my work is extremely helpful. Anyways, check me out in all those places if you haven't already. Thanks for listening, guys.